There may have been this just in. There was an explosion in an active war zone. Mort 11. What exactly happened? Who did it? And where exactly it was? I think I don't think that's very interesting at the moment. It doesn't really add much right now. But I mean, possibly something in the future. But at this moment in time, is it possible anybody blew up the bridge? Yes, I think so. It's not. This wouldn't be the first time that Russia has done something that is actively harmed them in the war. But at the same time, like not properly funding their soldiers, and also this dysfunction that was wrought with the paramilitary groups and warlords that he has fighting on for them. But also, you know, I don't know yet. While I was on break, I missed a lot of things. I had a lot of fun when I went on vacation. It wasn't really a vacation that I had the choice in making, but you know, no matter what, I had to go. But I'm back now. Oh man, am I back? And I'm back to, and I came back to something quite quite strange. Something that's not good, actually. I came back to it's like the opposite of coming home to a present. It's like coming home to see that your dog pooped all over the floor and peed all over the floor as well. The whole house smells like a zoo, and you got to look around to see where the next piece of poop is because the smell won't go away. It's kind of like one of those things, but in this case, instead of it being a dog that pooped on the floor, it was Tucker who pooped on my floor, who pooped on all of our collective floor. And it was sanctioned by Elon Musk because while I was gone, Elon Musk and Tucker Carlson had a little, you know, get together. They had a little thing where they merged their powers of cringe and evil to make something that's both cringe and evil. And that is Tucker Carlson's new show on Twitter debuted. Okay. And episode 1 is one that I would imagine that you would all expect was full of lies and stupidity. But it's something that's really interesting that I think is worth going over, mostly because it shows you a lot about how Tucker lies. We know he lies, right? But how he lies is something that's really important that I feel like really encapsulated here in this episode 1 that he did on the Ukraine on the Ukraine defense of their own homeland, and a tragedy and possibly a war crime that happened, which was the bombing and destruction, which is the possible bombing and destruction of the Nova Kakhovka Dam. Okay, let's take a look and let's see how Tucker lies.
He blew up the. Hey, it's Tucker Carlson. This morning it looks like somebody blew up the Kakhovka Dam in southern Ukraine. The rushing wall of water wiped out entire villages, destroyed a critical hydropower plant, and as of tonight puts the largest nuclear reactor in Europe in danger of melting down. So if this was intentional, it was not a military tactic, it was an act of terrorism. The question is, who did it? Well, let's see. The Kakhovka Dam was effectively Russian. It was built by the Russian government. It currently sits in Russian-controlled territory. The dam's reservoir supplies water to Crimea, which has been, for the last 240 years, home of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Blowing up the dam may be bad for Ukraine, but it hurts Russia more. And for precisely that reason, the Ukrainian government has considered destroying it. In December, the Washington Post quoted a Ukrainian general saying his men had fired American-made rockets at the dam's floodgate as a test strike. So really, once the facts start coming in, it becomes much less of a mystery what might have happened to the dam. Any fair person would conclude that the Ukrainians probably blew it up.
Okay, that's quite curious. Quite curious that it was the Ukrainians that must have probably blew it up. So it was in Ukraine. So him basing that it was blown up by Ukraine or the Ukrainian government was that he believes that it hurts Russia more, and he also believes that I blew up the dam. Thank you. He believes that it hurts Russia more, and he believes that Ukraine has been thinking about blowing up the dam. Two things. Ukraine has floated a lot of ideas on what to do about the campaign in Ukraine to take back their homeland. Striking the dam was also one of those ideas. And also, one of Russia's ideas is to make vulnerable the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. So when it comes to things that they were floating, I would say like holding hostage one of the world's largest nuclear power plants is much bigger than harming the dam, possibly. And I also don't believe that Ukraine has the possibility of even really harming that dam. But we can talk about that a little later. Let's listen to a little bit more of this.
Just as you would assume they blew up Nord Stream, the Russian natural gas pipeline, last fall. And in fact, the Ukrainians did do that, as we now know. It's not like Vladimir Putin is anxious to wage war on himself.
So here's one thing that's super interesting. No, we don't know if it was Ukraine that blew up the Nord Stream pipelines. What we do know is that Ukraine had plans to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline, but the actual plan that got carried out was pretty different than the plan that Ukraine had in mind. There were some similarities, but there were also some differences as well. I mean, obviously, any plan to do something like that is going to have a bunch of similarities. So do we know? No, I don't think blowing up the Nord Stream pipelines really helped Ukraine much. Mostly because those pipelines already shut down and weren't moving any natural gas by the time that it was blown up. It wasn't like they were pumping oil from Russia to Germany and then Ukraine wanted to cut that. It was already cut by Russia itself, actually. And Nord Stream 2 wasn't even operational to begin with. Nord Stream 1 was already shut down. So I'm not sure how much that really helped Ukraine.
Oh, but that's where you're wrong, Mr. and Mrs. Cable News consumer. Vladimir Putin is exactly that sort of man, the sort of man who'd shoot himself to death in order to annoy you. We know this from the American media, which wasted no time this morning in accusing the Russians of sabotaging their own infrastructure. Bill Kristol, the man who once told us that Saddam Hussein was responsible for 9/11, immediately denounced Putin as a war criminal and even more savagely compared him to Donald Trump.
So here's a super interesting thing as well. He keeps trying to say it's Russian. It's not Russian. It's occupied by Russia at the moment, but it's Ukrainian infrastructure on Ukrainian territory that Ukrainians want to take back. I don't know why they would blow up a dam that they wanted to take back. It doesn't really make much sense. It's going to make less sense the more we actually go into it. But once again, we'll talk about that a little later.
The rest of the pundit class made similar, clearly coordinated noises. Putin did it! Putin did it! And their reasoning was simple. Putin is evil, and evil people do evil things purely for the dark joy of being evil. In this specific case, Putin attacked himself, which is the most evil thing you can do, and therefore perfectly in character for a man that evil. That was their explanation. No one who's paid to cover these things seemed to entertain even the possibility it could have been the Ukrainians who did it. No chance of that. Ukraine, as you may have heard, is led by a man called Zelensky. And we can say for a dead certain fact that he was not involved. He couldn't have been. Zelensky is too decent for terrorism.
So here's something that I find super interesting, and it's another part of how Tucker lies. It's straw manning. A big thing is straw manning. He's saying the only reason why he gave a bunch of reasons for why Ukraine might blow up the dam. Has he given any reasons for why Russia might blow up the dam? Any reason whatsoever that could possibly make it reasonable for Russia to overflow the dam, cause damage to the dam, flood the dam? Is there any reason? He doesn't bring it up. He says there's no reason for Russia to do that ever. For any reason. There's no possible reason. Even though Ukraine, who's in the middle of a counteroffensive to take back that territory that the dam very conveniently cut off and stop them from moving in a certain direction, to close and shorten the counteroffensive line and make it easier for Russians to move from one place to another because a large portion is cut off. We don't really talk about that, do we? It just has to be people thinking that Russia bad because bad. And that's the only reason why anybody would ever think that Russia would ever do anything wrong, because Russia would only do good things. Because hey, listen, they hate gay people just like me, right? Oh, they want to ban trans people just like me, so they must do good things because they're good, right, Tucker?
Now you see him on television, and it's true you might form a different impression. Sweaty and rat-like, a comedian turned oligarch, a persecutor of Christians, a friend of BlackRock. But don't believe your own eyes. Actually, Mr. Zelensky is a very good man. The best, really. As George W. Bush once noted, he is our generation's Winston Churchill. Of all the people in the world, our shifty, dead-eyed Ukrainian friend in the tracksuit is uniquely incapable of blowing up a dam. He's literally a living saint, a man in whom there is no sin.
Well, I do believe that Russians are pretty incapable of blowing up the dam. Not because Ukraine and Zelensky are saints, mostly because it's, well, we'll get into it, I promise, but it's not very feasible with what they have.
That's why Lindsey Graham is so attracted to him. They're just two good people, hanging out together and being good. And like all good people, when they meet in person, they...
It's going to skip forward a little bit. He basically shows Lindsey Graham and Zelensky being like, using bombs against bad people is pretty good.
Hey, it's Tucker.
Not very interesting.
Now everybody in power talks like that. Diversity is our strength. Trans women are women. Zelensky is Churchill. It's all self-evidently true. Doesn't need an explanation, and don't ask questions.
You can ask questions. Go ahead. I just think the questions that you ask tell that you don't know what you're talking about. Those are all just statements. Okay. Well, you think trans people bad? Okay. How about that? Do you think white people deserve to be the majority of America? Why? Don't ask questions. Because we do. This doesn't make any sense. But apparently when other people believe something even somewhat similar, that's a huge problem. But okay, sure, whatever, I guess. But I want to talk about something super quick, okay? Because this is most of the thrust of his arguments on this topic, and I just think it's very strange, right? When it comes to war, we're not only talking about bombs and bullets and boots on the ground. We're talking about this war. We're also talking about the information, right? And that's something that's very strong and very important. This is probably one of the most televised, one of the most watched and global and documented wars in human history ever, possibly ever. Right? And it may be the most documented in all of human history, period. Depending on what the next wars will be and how they will end, right? So we know a lot, but we also don't know a lot, because there's a thing that's called the fog of war. All right. I promise you, fog of war is more than a video game. It is real. And that fog of war leads to a lot of people wanting to fill in the gaps, and both Russia and Ukraine fill in those gaps with their own personal narratives to make things happen that they personally want happen, that is both that is beneficial to their aims of winning this war, right? So it's important to take things with a grain of salt and not just not just take whatever you possibly think. And I feel like Tucker took the exact position that he would think is true, that he wants to believe, of his entire thing, that we should not be funding this war. We should not be helping Ukrainians at all. They're all bad. And so we should just allow them to just kill each other. And no matter what happens, we shouldn't care. And if Russia keeps expanding into Eastern Europe and up against NATO borders by gobbling up more nations, who really cares? Because have you seen gas prices recently? Even though apparently this war hasn't done anything towards gas prices, even though we all know it absolutely has. Grain prices as well. Not really help it. The wars in shutting down massive countries with massive amounts of natural resources like Ukraine and Russia seems to be having a deleterious effect on the world economy. But who cares, right? Because have you seen them transgenders? Did you see that one was producing milk once? That's crazy. We should talk about that instead. That's way more important. Anyways, it's just super weird, right? Super weird and super strange. But I want to talk about something. Let's move outside of theorizing and let's move towards what we do actually know, because Tucker didn't really talk about that much. So let's talk about it. Let's go to Reuters, one of the most trusted, neutral websites and news publications that we know of. Not perfect, but it does a reasonably good job. A huge Soviet-era dam on the Dnipro River that separates Russian and Ukrainian forces in southern Ukraine was breached on Tuesday. unleashing floodwaters across the war zone. Ukraine said Russia destroyed it, while Russia said Ukraine sabotaged it to cut water supply to Crimea and distract from their faltering counteroffensive. What is the dam and what happened? The dam is a part of the Kakhovka I can't speak. The dam is a part of the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant. It's 30 meters, 98 feet tall, and 2 miles long. Construction was started under Soviet leader Joseph Stalin and was finished under Khrushchev. The dam bridged the Dnipro River, which formed the front line between Russia and Ukrainian forces in southern Ukraine. The reservoir holds a bunch of water, and it would be a problem if it blew up, and it did. And it really did. Ukraine, which commented first, said Russia was responsible. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky accused Russian forces of blowing up the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant station inside the facility and said Russia must be held accountable for their terrorist attack. But should we believe Zelensky? I don't necessarily believe so. I definitely don't think we should believe Russian authorities, but we shouldn't believe anybody off the front because everybody wants to use these types of issues to help them in this war. It's just how it works. All right. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but it's something that you really should keep in mind. Okay. How will it affect the area? With water levels surging higher, many thousands of people will likely be affected. Ukrainian officials estimate about 42,000 people are at risk of flooding. And the peak of the water was expected to come on Wednesday, which is just a couple of days ago, just 2 days ago as of this recording at the moment. And some 25,000 people in Russia-held parts, about 80,000 communities were threatened by flooding. So this is something very curious. So let's talk about this really quick. All right. So Tucker said that he thinks it's going to hurt Russians more to blow up this dam. But as we know here from Ukraine itself, they believe that their side of the Dnipro River is going to be harmed more than the Russian side of the Dnipro River by almost double. So unless he thinks that Zelensky would kill himself to make Putin have a bad day, and not the opposite way around, then I don't know why this would possibly happen when it very clearly shows that Ukrainians were going to be harmed more. Ukrainians in Ukrainian-held territory were going to be harmed more by this flooding by Ukrainians' own standards than Russians, unless he thinks that they're just lying here, which I mean, I guess, but at that point, what's the point of listening to anything, right? The destruction of the dam also risks water levels rising. Also risks drying out the Crimean peninsula and them not being able to receive any fresh water. And they receive 85% of their water for agriculture and other purposes through the Dnipro, right? And also the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant is an issue as well. But we'll talk about that. It's not as much of an issue as people like Tucker will make it out to be, because at the moment he's trying to say that Ukrainians were, and I want you to remember this, he's trying to say that he believes that Ukrainians are going to blow up or threaten or damage the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, the largest power plant in Europe and the third largest nuclear power plant in the world, that's right on the front line, that they could possibly take within the next couple of months. For what reason? Just to blow it up and then just in the middle of their own country, just so they can hope that the wind may take some of the particulates over to the Russian side. What sense does that make? It doesn't make much sense, I think personally. But I think it starts to make a lot less sense once you go even deeper into what happened. Let's listen to this video from reporting from Ukraine. I really like this guy. He's pretty balanced. He has a little bit of he has a Ukrainian bias, but we can listen to some of the arguments that he made on both sides and not listen to necessarily his conclusion, but let's listen to what he has to say about what led up to the situation that we're at the moment. Let's take a little look.
Day 468. Today the biggest news comes from the Carlson region. Here, due to the partial destruction of the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant, the water has wiped out dozens of settlements and islands and caused a huge ecological and humanitarian problem. In this video, I will tell you how the dam was destroyed, how it affects the nuclear power plant, and how it affects the Ukrainian counteroffensive operation. First of all, we need to understand the scale of the destruction. The areas that took the hardest hit are located in close proximity to the dam. In Novakhovka, the water levels increased by 5 meters and completely flooded the town. Some video showed how the current carried whole houses down the stream. The walls of other buildings often collapsed under pressure, which resulted in the total demolition of the houses. The islands in front of the town have almost completely disappeared. When it comes to other settlements down the stream, the level of destruction turned out to be even higher. Because of their location, the settlements on the eastern side of the river were hit by the wave. By noon, 13 settlements appeared underwater, and it is expected that up to 40 settlements will appear underwater in total, because the hole in the dam gradually becomes bigger, sending more and more water down the stream. Apart from the settlements, hundreds of cemeteries, landfills, and also burial grounds for infected cattle were flooded as well, which means that there is an extremely high risk of contamination of the water with infectious and fatal diseases.
Yes. And with Ukrainians knowing that this is going to harm their side more, they must have definitely done this, because it would be a fantastic idea to destroy their own country purposefully, just to get one over on Putin once.
On top of that, the flood damaged the oil refinery in Kazatske, and some sources reported that hundreds of tons of oil spilled into the river. The only good news comes from the nuclear power plant. The engineers protected the nuclear power plant against such accidents. The power plant has 2 separate water pools operating in a closed circuit. The only times when the power plant takes the water from the reservoir is when the water level in the pool slightly drops due to evaporation. So even if the dam down the stream completely disappears, the water can still be pumped via pipes. But refilling is a very rare event, and given that right now the power plant only works at the 33% capacity and only uses 2 out of 6 blocks, there will be no shortages of water.
So that's another Tucker Carlson talking point down, that they would use this to threaten the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. 1, because it wouldn't make any sense for them to do it, and 2, because it wouldn't even be possible for this to harm the power plant, because they know that it's built to withstand these types of issues. Quite curious. Give dog a treat. Kedis. Fry. There you go, buddy. Ruby, would you like a fry? There you go. I'll toss it to you. You don't have to get up. There you go. Good job. They gobbled. They both gobbled.
At first, Russian state media reported that Ukrainians intensely shelled the dam and damaged the floodgates, resulting in uncontrolled water release. Ukrainian analysts responded to these claims by pointing out that Ukrainians could not even destroy the Antonivsky bridge with HIMARS by shelling it for 2 months. The dam is an extremely powerful structure that can only be damaged by planting tons of explosives.
Okay, so this is a really important thing that we need to talk about, okay? Ukraine couldn't have striked and blown up the dam. Not because Zelensky is a pure baby angel, but because Ukraine literally doesn't have the firepower to do something like that. They literally couldn't do it. And if they did, there would have been video of it. You would have seen it happen, right? You would have seen that happen. Enough. So he talked about a very specific bridge, okay? And this is something that happened in Ukraine that we didn't talk about that much. Because I don't do that many Ukraine updates in their own dedicated video. But it's something that I've been keeping up for a while. It happened when they were taking back southern Ukraine and Kherson specifically. All right, let me bring this up for you. So the Antonivsky Bridge is a really important bridge that links the Kherson city to the other side of the Dnipro River, right? And it was a very important bridge that Ukrainians wanted to take down, mostly because it stopped Russians from resupplying their troops inside of the city. It stopped Russians from resupplying their troops inside of the city and made it easier for Ukrainians to take down, because the next closest bridge was a long way away, and made it much more dangerous for them to be able to cross with important infrastructure, right? Ukrainians bombed that bridge for weeks. Okay, weeks they were trying to take down the bridge, and they couldn't take down the bridge for the longest time. The reason is because not only were Russians able to fix the bridge faster than they were able to damage the bridge for a long time, but also because the bombs that they used and that they have aren't big or strong enough to be able to just take out a bridge in a single go. They just couldn't. And so what they did is they had to turn the bridge into Swiss cheese, and making it almost impossible for trucks to be able to use it. and made it basically only a footbridge that was damaged that they couldn't take heavy machinery on, or else they would risk damaging the bridge even further, right? And that's not something that they wanted to do. And so they spent weeks doing that, and they still weren't able to take down the bridge. After weeks of bombings, then finally they were able to take it down. But don't you think that something as small, here's the bridge in question, okay? Let me show you the bridge that it took Ukrainians weeks to take down. Do you think that this structure is as fortified and hard to take down as a 100-foot tall, 2-mile long dam? You think that's the case? You think that's possible, Mr. Tucker Carlson, that in just overnight, in one, maybe two HIMARS strikes from 40 miles away, they were able to take down an entire bridge, even though weeks of constant precision strikes by one of the world's most advanced rocket systems wasn't able to take down this flimsy rinky-dink bridge? Really? Think that makes any sense? Personally, I don't. I don't think so, if I'm going to be honest with you. But let's listen a little further.
The Russian Ministry of Defense claimed that this is exactly what Ukrainians did. Defense Minister Shoigu reported that Russian forces completely defeated the Ukrainian counteroffensive in the Zaporizhia region. Ukrainians decided to compensate for the losses by redeploying everyone from the Kherson region, and because Ukrainians were afraid that Russians would take advantage of the empty front line and again capture Kherson, Ukrainians blew up the dam. The Ukrainian side responded by pointing out that the hole in the dam is located in the middle, and since Russians had destroyed the bridge on the Ukrainian side, only Russians had access to the middle section of the dam, and only Russians could transport tons of explosives.
Yeah, this is also super interesting, something Tucker didn't bring up that I personally feel like is a pretty important point. Russians already attacked the bridge. Russians already destroyed part of the dam. This part of the dam, the western section of the dam that leads to the Ukrainian-controlled territory, they've already blown up part of the dam before to stop Ukrainians from being able to cross it. So apparently, not only did Ukrainians magically moonwalk, magically like Jesus water walk across the dam over to Russian-controlled territory, but then they also planted hundreds of pounds of explosives out of nowhere. But then also were able to detonate them, and then did it knowing for a fact that it would harm them more than it would Russians, even though they just took that territory and are starting to use it as bridgeheads to be able to use in their counteroffensive. Is this making sense to you? Just remember, all of this means it was definitely Ukraine that did it. But there's more, don't worry.
Ukrainian officials claimed that Russian forces decided to blow up the dam because Ukrainians had gradually established control over all islands and were ready to open a second southern front and conduct an amphibious operation. In fear that they would not be able to cope with the Ukrainian offensive in Zaporizhia and Kherson simultaneously, Russians blew up the dam and wiped out all Ukrainian positions on the islands. Interestingly, some Ukrainian sources pointed out that the same occupation officials that blamed Ukraine at first pretended that there are no explosions.
That's kind of weird, isn't it? That's kind of strange, isn't it? If Russians didn't want this dam to blow up at all, and they didn't want anything bad to happen to it, because remember, this provides 85% of the water to Crimea, don't you think it would be a little strange? Don't you think it would be a little strange that at first they would come out and say, actually, there were no problems whatsoever? Don't you think that they would want to be the first ones to start pointing fingers at who's to blame after they knew the dam blew up? Don't you think? I think so. Russia blames Ukraine for stuff that they don't even have necessarily the possibility of doing. So it just doesn't even make any sense, really. But whatever, I guess.
The news about the explosion started appearing at 2 a.m. At 3 a.m., the occupation mayor of Novokakhovka reported that the news about the explosion is fake and that he's in the town, and confirms that the night has been quiet.
The Russian occupation official himself of the region, who was there that night, came out and said that nothing bad happened. Nothing happened. He was like, I was there the whole night. Nah, it was just chilling. Crazy, isn't it?
50 minutes later, he said that Ukrainians were shelling the dam all night and damaged the floodgates.
Listen, we go from literally nothing happened, I was here all night, to actually everything happened and we all almost died. In 50 minutes, bro got a call from Putin and was like, you better change your tune right now. It was like, oh, actually, there was a lot of problems. It was huge. It was terrible. Who could have seen this coming? Oh my goodness. But they didn't do anything about it.
The analysts concluded that Russians tried to make a relatively small hole in the dam to flood only Ukrainians on the islands. Close to 4 a.m., they understood that they screwed up because the power of the water gradually amplified the destruction and the top part of the dam started to fall apart. As a result, the Ukrainian counteroffensive from the Kherson direction is temporarily cancelled. The river is 4 to 5 kilometers wide, so Ukrainians will be spotted and destroyed before even getting close to the other side of the river. Right now, Ukrainians are conducting an evacuation of their troops and ammunition that they shipped to the islands. Interestingly, Russians are doing the same. Because the flood turned out to be much bigger than expected, a lot of Russian positions were gradually cut off from the mainland and turned into shrinking islands.
Man, that's wild. So it was Ukraine that did this and they were planning to do it, but at the same time while they were planning to do it, they also planned to lose a ton of Western-made weapons and equipment, and also lose important tactical positions in their counteroffensive that's happening right now that they've been planning for months. And also shorten the front line, making it easier for Russians to defend. But remember, all of this means to Tucker that this is definitely the Ukrainians that did this. Now, what do I think? Personally, I think that no one really blew up the dam. All right. I don't really believe at the moment that anybody blew up the dam. I think the dam, after the war and after strikes earlier and after it just being crumbling Soviet infrastructure that was put in place by Joseph Stalin, means that it just fell apart over time. That's what I personally think happened. Without knowing anything else, that's what I think happened, right? Unless it was actually Russians who striked it and tried, like, that theory is correct, that they tried to put a small hole in it, and then it grew to be a much bigger hole. I haven't seen anybody say that there were any explosions. I think it would make sense that Russia wouldn't want this dam to blow up, right? Because they knew how dangerous it would be if that happened. Sure, it may slow down the Ukrainians, but it would cut off, like, one of the number one reasons for them stopping after they took, like, Kherson and Zaporizhia nuclear power plant and the dam, mostly was to secure water for Crimea, right? Secure water and everything that they want to build a bridgehead, build a land bridge to Crimea, so they can basically do whatever they want, so they can guarantee that the stolen land that they took remains able to be self-sustaining without them having to worry about spending more money keeping it afloat, right? I just think that's wild. There's seismology reports consistent with concussive explosions a few days after the dam fell. That dang dam. Evidence is growing that the Novakhovka Dam was blown up after the publication of seismic data showing there was a blast at the site in the early hours of Tuesday. NOSAR, a Norwegian seismic array, said signals from a regional station in Romania pointed to an explosion at 2:45 a.m. NOSAR did not draw any conclusions on who was responsible. The New York Times quoted a senior Biden administration official as saying U.S. spy satellites had also detected an explosion at the dam before its collapse, but adding that U.S. Intelligence analysts had still not concluded who caused the explosion or what exactly happened. Okay, this doesn't really say much. There may have been this just in. There was an explosion in an active war zone. Mort 11. What exactly happened, who did it, and where exactly it was, I think I don't think that's very interesting at the moment. It doesn't really add much right now. But I mean, possibly something in the future. But at this moment in time, is it possible anybody blew up the bridge? Yes, I think so. It's not. This wouldn't be the first time that Russia has done something that is actively harmed them in the war. But at the same time, like not properly funding their soldiers, and also this dysfunction that was wrought with the paramilitary groups and warlords that he has fighting on for them. But also, I don't know yet, so I'm going to be a little bit more responsible and say I think it's possible that it didn't, that nobody blew it up. But if anybody did blow it up, the evidence really points towards Russia doing it more than Ukraine doing it. If there was a bomb anywhere near what happened, the evidence just does not line up with Ukraine doing this, especially since it happened, 2 days into their counteroffensive. Don't you think that's a little strange? 2 days into their counteroffensive is when they decided to blow up a dam that shortened the front line and made it harder for them to do a counteroffensive? They did it specifically then? 2 days after? Really? I mean, maybe. It's possible. I don't really think so, though. I don't really think so, though. And this slows down the counteroffensive by a lot. By a lot, actually. I think this shows a lot about how Tucker lies, okay? He says things that feel true. He talks with a lot of emotion, but what he wants to do is pull the wool over your eyes. He wants to lie to you. There's a lot of information in here that he did not pull out at all. The fact that Russian officials themselves in the area, that are in control of these areas, that have every single reason to call out and blame Ukrainians for anything bad that happens, decided to say that actually nothing happened and it wasn't a problem. The people who were there that night said nothing happened. The people who have every reason to tell you that something bad happened and it was the Ukrainians' fault for the longest time, until it started to become clear that something really did happen, were saying that actually everything was perfectly fine. I think that tells me that something either went wrong or something unexpected happened in that area. Then there was a planned issue. There would be no, if bombs went off at the dam and they knew that it wasn't them, why in the world would they take so long in blaming the Ukrainians? Why in the world would their story change and evolve to become, gradually worse and worse over time, when they could have just gone to boom, Ukrainian terrorist attack who want to kill all of us, because they're evil demon spawn who are controlled by the American puppet regimes. Why in the world would they do that when they do that with literally everything else that happens in the war? Why would they not do that here? There's a really big ecological issue that's happening right now that's also harming them and the land that they're claiming ownership of, right? It's just, whatever, I guess. Thank you, Tucker. Incredibly cool. He wants to lie. He wants to make things as black and white as possible, because then it's easy to choose who's right and who's wrong. And at the end of the day, he's the one who comes out who's right, because he's the guy who tells it how it is. He's the guy who speaks truth to power, while everybody else are these shifty-eyed, dead-eyed, cubic stare, 1,000-yard stare cretins who wanna kill people. But him, he just wants to speak the truth. No, he doesn't. He wants to collect a bag. And he's perfectly happy collecting a bag if it means that he's lying about somebody else, their life, their livelihood, and the country that's being invaded, taken from them, destroyed, and being bombarded with untold amounts of war crimes that we may not even have the full grasp of in the next 10 years. But whatever, I guess it's all Ukrainians' fault. And it seems like a war with the truth is not the only war that it seemed like a war with the truth is not the only war that Tucker is in right now, because it also seems like he's in a war with his old boss, because Fox just sent my boy a cease and desist letter telling him that he's not allowed to actually produce his show and compete with Fox News as per their non-compete clause. So he's actually not allowed to do this show, and they threatened to actually sue him if he continued on with it. So this is something that he knew that he couldn't do, that Twitter knew that he couldn't do, that they all decided to do anyways, because because Elon is desperate for money to get people on the platform because his platform is dying and nobody wants to spend money here anymore. So he decided that instead of like trying to make it profitable, he just is going to make it worse and hopefully profit off of those conservative bucks, those conservative cuck bucks, in keeping the platform afloat. And every single time you hear him talking about Twitter, oh, we're so close to profitability. Oh, we're so close to breaking even. Oh, we're just right there. Oh, this is what's going to make us break even. And then it doesn't make them break even. And then the next thing's going to make us break even. And then it doesn't make them break even again. I don't think Twitter's going to be around for much longer, which is why I think this whole thing is very funny. It's like deciding to tie yourself to a sinking ship because you think soon it's going to float. It won't. Either Twitter's going to die or Elon's going to sell it, because with Elon at the helm, I'm going to tell you now, there's no possible way that this business is going to go anywhere except for straight down. Just like my brain power after watching a Tucker Carlson segment. Very sad, very cringe. Thank you, Tucker. Very annoying. And that, I think, in my opinion, is how Tucker lies. IQ halved. Send help. I spilled my IQ, mods. Help, 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 help. Oh, sorry. I didn't see you there. If you're enjoying the content, hit the subscribe button. If you don't, it'll make Boo very sad. I know a bunch of you who are watching are not subscribed. Join the frenzy. You won't regret it. Thank you, Boo.